Thank you so much. All right, now I'll make sure I keep it professional since it's being recorded for our friends. Nice to meet you all. I see such amazing, really cool projects and chatter going on the Discord. So really need to be a part of it. Thank you, Emma. We met, kind of virtually because I think of all of the world that we're in today, but it's always great to meet you. I hope I'll meet each one of you. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very much open. I basically have two initiatives or two different companies that I am equally passionate about. I am a firm believer that you can have your cake and eat it too. And I love both artificial intelligence as well as really branding and creating a name for yourself as an individual, but also for the companies that, you never know, the idea that you come up with this weekend could end up becoming a startup that could end up becoming a company that employs people and has a mission. And I'm always, the biggest part of success for companies is literally their ability to get the word out about what they do and how it can help them. And how it can help their customers. So I'm a big believer in those two things. Give you guys a little history about why I'm even here to talk to you. My AI journey specifically started on let me mute the device, on a little known project known as Alexa, Amazon Alexa. I was an employee 10 on the skills team, very, very early days. I've built now over 100 skills or apps for Alexa. I have over 1 million unique users of those skills. So I've been able, and I'm an independent developer. It was not my job to do that. I just did it kind of like what you're doing this weekend. I did it for fun. I did it because it was interesting and I wanted to contribute. But I also did it because I have a son who has Down syndrome and I wanted the world to be accessible to him through his voice. I also have a dad who's older and had an accident and has a traumatic brain injury. So he can't use a phone or, a computer in a traditional way. So AI and specifically voice technology became a medium that I could build for and that I didn't actually know how to build for when I started, but I did exactly what you're doing now. I learned by doing, right? I opened up GitHub. There wasn't really a GitHub back then, but I opened up, shared projects. We shared a lot of code kind of through Google Drive type solutions. And then Alexa moved all of their samples to GitHub, and almost everything I've built has come from some open source project. And I've been able to iterate and move much faster with that. So that's another part of what I'm passionate about, is leveraging open source, becoming part of the community, not only building stuff that I can use to make a difference, but also then contributing back to those projects and helping other people do the same. So that's kind of me in a nutshell and how I got to where I am right now.
That's amazing, Noelle. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, when I was doing a little bit of research on you, I was like, oh my gosh, you worked for the Alexa, who has somehow became like a global meme at this point.
Yeah, who knew at the time?
No, that's crazy. I was wondering, because a lot of our participants here today are in school, whether it be like high school or going into university. So can you talk about how you really discerned that you wanted to go into tech? You wanted to go into, I think you went into school for computer science, is that right?
Kind of. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So I started off, I think I was actually in avionics, which is kind of like, anyway, not really, more hardware focused. But I wanted to be a pilot, to be honest. Wow. And then I went on that journey, got, as many of us do, we follow our passion to a certain point, and then we're like, do we really want to do this for a living, or could I maybe do this for fun instead? And it was, if any of you have heard the drama of Y2K, it was very similar to the kind of drama we're in now with nobody with skills in data science. There was no one with enterprise level transactional programming skills. And so they wanted anyone who was willing to learn. The companies like IBM were willing to teach. And so my first job was at IBM. I knew nothing. They taught me everything. And then I became an expert. There was one point where I could look at a log file, and no matter what it was, I could figure out, I would know what the problem was because they were finite, right? I learned 1,000 different problems, and eventually I knew them all. And it was like a little 2-year window, but it was so nice to know I could not be stumped by a piece of software. Those days are gone. But it was nice while it lasted. But I think before then, I always tell people, especially the younger you are, my dad introduced me to science fiction. Like when I was 6 years old, I was reading books and watching movies like Star Wars and Star Trek, and talking to computers in those movies. It wasn't like the main thing, but it was like ambient. It was just there. There was an expectation. Of course, I'm talking to the technology. So I kind of grew up, and granted, I love reading. I love immersing myself in those types of experiences, and I love science fiction. But I always kind of felt like computers, we would talk to those. And so it's just interesting that in my lifetime, we were able to then build a thing and then productize a thing that really demonstrated that that was possible. And now I'm a huge believer. Like if there's something you want to do that, or you're thinking about doing, it is definitely possible. It's just a function of disciplined execution and time. And sometimes people aren't patient enough. That's true. But in my case, it worked out. 20 years later, I was building the things I was reading about, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you bring up the whole Y2K thing, because personally, my stepdad, he loves talking about that sort of era. Like he originally went to school.
It was super dramatic.
I know. He originally went to school for engineering, and then that whole thing happened. So there was like a lot of job opportunities in the tech IT industry, right?
Yes.
So that's why he always like gives me lectures like tech is the future.
Yeah.
AI, all that stuff. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna talk to
Noelle. The funny thing is, we are right there now, like the data science world, data engineering, AI engineering, applied AI. You don't even have to know how to build a model. If you just know how to consume a model, how to, edit a model, how to get data. And, most companies do not have people that want to massage data for a living, right? We call them data wranglers. They're like data unicorns. Like people just don't want to do that job. But I found you could find a way, but today, like it's just like in Y2K, we could not find enough people to do the work. And that caused like this panic in the industry. And we're approaching that same level of panic in companies where they're like, as we see, right, Google is now providing free training for data engineers, giving you a certificate and then employing you because they're literally taking you off the street, training you so they can hire you because they can't count on colleges to push out enough people to do this work. And we just have a huge, huge shortage gap. So I love seeing it again because now I can tell people, no, for real, you could be on a stage talking about this like you're an expert years from now, even though today you could not imagine that being possible. Like, we think to ourselves, like, I could barely write this code. And little do you know, just by starting and staying dedicated to it, in 5 years, you could be a thought leader. I mean, I was listed as the #1 person to have at an AI event, #1 keynote, but I didn't graduate from high school. The person under me had 3 PhDs. It was ridiculous. But it just goes to show, it's not always about your classical training. Sometimes it's about your passion combined with your discipline and your ability to just execute. And I think all of us, if you're in a voluntary hackathon, you are one of these people. So I'm excited.
No, I definitely agree. I think, as students, we often feel the need to sort of follow this conventional career path, finish high school, go to university, and then you get a job. But as we see in the job market in this industry, that's kind of really changing. And there's such an emphasis on actual practical experience as opposed to the sort of traditional career path.
Yeah.
So going a little bit back to, I guess, your schooling and whatnot, I guess even more so back then, STEM it's still a very much male dominated field, but I guess back then it could have been much worse.
No, unfortunately, it's just bad in general.
In general.
And unfortunately, it seems indefinite. I'm hoping that we somehow break this cycle, but the numbers are the same. I look around and it's the same, but how could it be the same for 20 years? And we care about it. I just don't even understand. I do a little bit. I realize that a lot of these challenges are systemic. And when you have systemic issues, even though there's people like us that are like advocating, what ends up happening is, you know, women, and especially younger women, will get into situations. I'll tell you a funny story. I talked to this older woman. Her name was Nina Totenberg. She's on NPR. She was on Capitol Hill. She was one of the only women on Capitol Hill doing the reporting. And she said in a conference last year, she said, she goes, I'm part of the suck it up generation, you know, the generation that got treated badly and we just sucked it up and performed better so that we could just play. And I'm kind of part of that generation too. But the sad thing is, what I'm seeing is we've got this new generation of people who are like, I'm not going to take that. But guess what? Then they leave and they go become psychiatrists or philanthropists or startup entrepreneurs. They leave tech. Right. So, and then our numbers get worse. So it's really something that if any of you are working on this hackathon project, I'd be happy to see it. But we need to figure out, you know, how do we do this? And one thing I've done is I'm like all about the community. You know, if I can create a community of women, you know, in this field, that's beyond the company you work for, right? Which is kind of what I've done now, like beyond the company, because that company is going to come and go. Today, you spend an average of 3 years at a certain company. So you want a group of women who will support you and validate your experiences, right? So let's say you get a bad manager who tells you you shouldn't be in this field. And yeah, they say that to you. Even though some of you are strong enough to know that's ridiculous, the problem's you, not me. Some of us in those moments, look, even me, and I've worked my butt off, and I will look around and be like, wait, maybe I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, like, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. And without that community of women to go, no, this is not about you. This is about them. Just move on to the next thing. Without that, I think that's why people leave the industry, because they're like, I feel alone. I don't feel valued. Why would I stay here? I mean, I struggle every day with the question of whether or not to let my daughter, you know, venture into the world of tech. Because I'm like, gosh, do I want her to have to work twice as hard to be seen as just the same? I don't know.
I've oftentimes heard when it comes to like women and marginalized people, it's work 2 times harder to get half as far.
Yeah. So, I do think if you work twice as hard, you'll be at least at par.
Yeah.
But still, if you're one of those people who work twice as hard, you probably don't want to be the same. You want to be the best. And so now you have to work 4 times as hard to be seen as better. Oh, it's not right, man. But like I said, I think community is part of that. I think women starting companies, women taking leadership roles, becoming CEOs, women surrounding themselves with other women in those leadership roles. I mean, we're better. If you look at the statistics of women in leadership roles in the Fortune 500, the numbers are better. They're still dismal, but they're still like token. They're one female in the executive committee, one female on the board. And that's not how, like, you're still the minority. You're still the singular voice that people can dismiss. You know, anyway, it's something that we have to work on together, and we have to be of the mindset that we're going to stick with this and we're going to change this industry, because otherwise, you could go become a yoga instructor or massage therapist. It's a bit of a fight to be a woman in tech, but it's worth it. I mean, I stay because I feel like I'm changing people's lives. And I think each of us, you know, has that opportunity if we choose to accept it.
Yes, I know that you're an advocate for, I guess, ethical and responsible AI use and like in leadership in general. And I think we're in a really like interesting time when people are like, oh yeah, I guess we have to include women to save face. Yes. So I've often heard, like, I have some friends who are studying like tech, IT, cybersecurity and whatnot. And then she's actually heard some things like, oh, she only got that position because she's a woman. Like I feel like, I don't know, in some ways, sometimes we're kind of regressing, but yeah. Can you share a bit of your experiences, like as a woman in STEM, like the sort of like blatant barriers that you experience, and like, how do you deal with that? Right.
Yes. I'll start with the dealing. People will always say these things, and sadly, it will be your female peers. It will be, you know, Caucasian, African-American, like, it doesn't matter. It's a type of mindset that causes people to think this way. And that mindset has no gender, no ethnicity. Like it is how someone is raised. It is their limited view of how the world could be or what you could do in it. And so that's the first thing I encourage people to do, is get very confident in what you offer. And one of the ways, I won't say the only way, the way that I've done it is by just being willing to have a perspective and document it, blog about it, do videos about it. I mean, if you go back like to 2008, like you see these videos of me saying like, middleware is the future. I was willing to just put my foot down and have a perspective. But in doing that, I also was authentic enough to share when I shifted my perspective and why I shifted it. And when I started to do that, people started to trust me. And like I said, that trust has no gender, has no ethnicity, has no, neurological pattern. Like it applies to everyone. It's a mindset. So I encourage all of you to spend time honing your own voice so that you can be strong in it. Like when you say, this is the way I think it should happen, like be willing to put your foot down. There's a leadership principle at Amazon, which I actually really like, called disagree and commit. And what it means is until someone asks you to do that, you can like stand firmly behind, this is the way it should be done. But eventually someone's going to say, I'm your boss, so you're going to do it the way I want, whether you like it or not. And you have to, and I agree, this is a leadership principle, you have to like strongly and confidently take that leadership guy, even if you do not agree with it. You've said your piece, you've documented your opposition to that idea, and then you disagree and you commit as if it was your own idea. Sorry. And that is critical. I'm going to just grab a cough drop really quick. But that's critical, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we've talked a little bit about your background and being a woman in STEM, the barriers and overcoming that. I'd like to move this portion on to AI. So I guess to really start this off, what is AI and how is it actualized in today's society? What is its significance? Right.
Yes, AI. Oh my goodness. So artificial intelligence, I'll start off with a quote that I love from one of my favorite authors of science fiction. His name's Arthur C. Clarke. And I don't know the quote exactly. I basically paraphrase it for my own use. So you can look it up, but it basically says that when you make artificial intelligence, it's basically AI when it's indistinguishable from magic. And it's not that it's indistinguishable from magic for everyone. It's indistinguishable from magic from the person who is using your technology. So I always go back to like that first day that I had my dad use Alexa, right? And that first day that my dad used Alexa, and really the first time my son, who at the time was 2, when the first time he used Alexa to turn on the lights, as a 2-year-old, his face like lit up. He was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe my voice just turned on a light across how is this even? It was magic to him. And my dad had the exact same 2-year-old wonder face, like, oh my gosh, right? The reality though, is every part of that magic was written fingers on a keyboard into a Python script that triggered, transistors. Like it was not magic. There was no supervised learning. There was no, automated decision making. It was a programmatic thing, but it was artificially intelligent for the person who used it. Right. And so Alexa is very much that way as well, where we're using a bunch of technology in order to take the words we use as a human and translate that to the words or the sentences, if you will, that a computer needs to understand, right? To the native language of a computer. And there's a bunch of technology, mostly software engineering, involved in that translation. But there's a little bit of AI because humans can say things a billion ways. And we need to create a piece of software that can kind of detect patterns and then make some presumptions. Because otherwise, the code we'd have to write would have to have like a billion switch statements. If they said this, if they said and, if they said or, right? The code would become extremely bloated and not perform very well. So AI leverages that. But for those of you who are not familiar with it, it really is another concept that is AI is kind of this bloated story-like term. It's a term we use to represent an entire field of technology. Often though, people are talking about machine learning, and machine learning is when you create a mathematical algorithm to help you make predictions about behavior. And the only way, just like in our human brain, the only way we can predict if something's going to happen is based on prior experience, or to a machine learning model, it would be past data. And so we can basically fuel a machine learning model or a decision maker. We can fuel it with a bunch of data. And now it can look back at those decisions and go, all right, well, I see 50,000 pictures of dogs. You give me a cat. I know that that's not one of the, it doesn't look anything like these 50,000 dogs that I've seen. So I can tell you that that's not a dog, right? And that's the simplest type of decision. But today, every one of you has been using AI in the form of spam, right? We don't even look in that folder anymore, right? Most of us don't even really know that it exists, but it's still there. And it's a piece of AI that's looking at a pattern based on lots of training data of emails that come from marketers that you don't want to see. And if it matches that pattern, it throws it into a folder, and you never even have to worry about it. And that's what AI is meant to do. It's to augment human ingenuity. It's to take away things we as humans just don't need to worry about. Could you imagine if we had to manually sift through spam every single day? Like my inbox is a mess enough with stuff that's not even spam, right? Like you do not want to see my Gmail inbox. Like it's ridiculous. But these are the types of use cases that AI provides. So just to give you some ideas, one is of course, natural language, Alexa. All of that is basically a collection of machine learning models used to understand human language and translate it to machine language. But there's also fun things like computer vision. And you probably have seen these demos with like bound boxes, right? Where you look at something and the computer, based on past data, can look at something and go, oh, that looks like a chair, and that looks like a person, and that looks like a dog. So it's able to identify in computer vision, able to identify to the pixel level what something is. And then on top of that, you can add things like anomaly detection, right? So let's say you're looking at a parking lot, right? And everything looks good. You've trained the model. This is what the parking lot should look like. It should be empty. And then a car rolls in. All of a sudden, an anomaly has occurred. There's a car in the parking lot. And so the decision maker, the model, can now trigger an alert that says, I don't know if it's bad or good, but it's not an empty parking lot anymore. So there's so many things that you can do with this technology to just make your ability to do work faster. And so those are just a couple examples. There's dozens and dozens of actually hundreds of models. You can build a model from scratch. So which means that any one of us could create a new model. But today I'm a big believer in applied AI. Companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft have all invested in building models for us to use as engineers. And those are called applied AI models. They're like computer vision, natural language. Like nobody's really building human language detection anymore. Like that's been done. And it's commoditized and available through services. I actually posted this in the Discord, like cognitive services for Microsoft.
No, that's crazy, Noelle. Like, I never realized that the junk email was AI. Like, I am so glad mail enhancement pills are not in regular inbox. Like, I see that all the time in my junk. I don't know why it sent that to me.
Exactly. Because they don't care.
Yeah, exactly. That's so crazy. I guess what I feel that is like a lot of the hesitation towards AI is that it's scary. Like, the whole perception that like it's going to be Terminator, the machines are going to take over. But yes. You're a huge advocate for ethical and responsible use in AI and machine learning. So can you talk about how we could sort of progress into the future in a sort of ethical and responsible way with AI?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you mentioned your friend who's in cybersecurity, because it's kind of the same thing, right? Like the internet was all good until there were hackers, right? And in the same way, AI is all good until someone misuses it. But here's the danger, I think, and why I am really big on AI literacy as part of a responsible practice, is that when you build with AI, remember, as I mentioned, it's using data, right, to create these models. Well, chances are, especially in a world where we have very specific, like in tech, our engineering teams are predominantly male. And so when we build software, they're going to be made by a homogeneous group of people for the most part, like, holistically. And so what does that mean to its outcome? And Alexa was a very good example of that, right? It was built mostly by males and distributed to everyone on the planet, not just males and females, but people with accents, and not just accents from different countries, in our own country, in Mississippi, in like New England, right? Like these people with these different languages, or people who spoke English as a second language. And Alexa, because of how it was built, didn't know what to do with that. Like, it was like, I don't even, this isn't data I was trained on. Today, that's no longer true. Obviously, very quickly, we uncovered after we went to production, like, oh goodness, we need to go fix this. But the same is true for facial recognition. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but Amazon released a facial recognition software and then almost immediately uncovered that it recognized white males. Of course it did, better than everyone else. And so they got rid of it. They basically took it off the line. Thank goodness, I guess. But guess what? IBM had the exact same problem. They launched a facial recognition software that, oh no, only recognized white males. And they were using it in judicial situations, in police situations. I mean, it was just a big old mess. So again, they decommissioned it. My view of the world, though, is AI isn't inherently wrong, right? It's based on the data that we give it. So taking it offline doesn't fix the problem, right? The problem is only fixed by collecting better data, by collecting holistic data, by training a model that actually understands that there's different demographics and different shades of brown, and right? Like that's the solution. And so companies like Microsoft have invested in that. I am a Microsoft MVP, which is one of their kind of stamps of people that love their technology and also advocate for it in the world. So I disclaim that that's why I mentioned them, but I also became an MVP because they seem to care. Like they care that these models are wrong and they go and try and fix it. And those are the companies that we're going to need when we're talking about these things, because the data is what makes something right or wrong. And the data is not finite. We control how much data we choose to train. I will be transparent with you and tell you that it's expensive, right? I don't know if you have like an iPhone and you've ever turned on the facial recognition portion. It's not like you just hold up your face and go cheese and then like facial recognition is enabled, right? If you do it, you have to do this like up, down, like all around, like circle with your face. And so imagine how expensive it would be for a company other than Apple, right? To go and say, if we're going to build this model, we need to get this 360-degree times 2 way of accessing this data. It's expensive for companies to do. And unfortunately, what I've found is if it impacts profit, it's much harder for companies to do the right thing.
Definitely. I think going back to the piece, what you said about how these teams were generally like all male in creating these facial recognition softwares and whatnot. I remember you saying in one of your podcasts, actually, you were talking about sort of like how important the DNA of the team is. So
yes.
Yeah. So imagining if that team was made of women and women of color, a bit more diverse, I wonder how like the trajectory of that software would have been today.
No, exactly. And honestly, like Alexa was just built 7 years ago and look what it's done to the world, right? I mean, granted, it was in development for a long time, but it just reached the market. You're built, like all of us are like playing around with products that we're just envisioning today. They can become very popular very quickly. And especially if they implement AI, like now we know better. Now we know to ask those questions. I've heard a term called design justice, and it basically says, don't just think about who you're going to help, right? The 1% of the 1% who's going to buy this expensive device and put it in their kitchen, but who could it hurt? Who could it harm? Who else could it help outside of that demographic that maybe you're shooting for? I mean, I feel like sometimes we get into our marketing brains and go for personas, but when it comes to AI and data collection, we can't be super persona driven because we actually don't know the personas who will end up interacting with our technology. So we need to be as inclusive as possible. So what I always say is it's going to be hard if you wanted to get like a perfect symphony of brown and white and, all sorts of different colored people, and then different ethnicities, and then different genders, and then different neurodiverse, thinkers, like that's going to take a long time to create the perfect product team. So instead, I offer or invite people to think about those who are passionate towards that. Like me, I represent a special needs audience, even though I myself don't have special needs because my son does, or I represent, elder care because I have a dad. There are people like I read this research that said even men with daughters can provide a much different perspective than those who don't have daughters. And I think that's so fascinating. I actually love it. I always ask I don't know if it's legal or not, but I always ask the people I'm going to work for, if it's a man, I'm like, do you have any girls? Do you have daughters? Because it changes the way they interact and they see the pain through their daughter's eyes of what it's like to work in a field like this. And so, it's like a little tip. If I know them well enough to ask them, like looking at their Instagram, okay, they have daughters, we're good. But yeah, that I call it inclusive engineering, right? Making sure that your engineering organization is as inclusive as possible. And if not, at least it's empathetic to those needs. And you can do that through user experience, right? Just make sure your user experience teams are addressing these different areas. I think that's something that you really have to work on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. That's so interesting. I guess, again, it's sort of unfortunate how only men with daughters have some sort of more profound understanding for women in general. But it's like only when you have someone that you care about that is like a child, that is your child, you begin to develop that sort of compassion.
Yes.
But no, I definitely see where you're coming from. But yeah, I guess another question I had for you is, I guess within the context of the pandemic, have you seen any like changes or noticeable trends within the tech industry, and sort of like how is the future of the tech industry of AI sort of progressing?
Well, I did something a little crazy. I changed jobs 3 times during the pandemic. I know it's crazy, but I almost, you did good. See, I kind of felt like
it's not as interesting. Oh. Sorry, continue.
Well, I didn't do it intentionally, but I didn't let the pandemic force me to tolerate things that I wouldn't typically tolerate, right? And so I actually feel like bad behavior became more, at least it was easier for me to detect. Like it was harder for people to hide, I guess, maybe in a virtual world, which is ironic, but I found myself very intolerant of bad behavior, of racially, injustice or anything like that. And so as soon as I found that it was a pattern that could not easily be changed by myself, that it was systemic within an organization, or that they weren't being super transparent and candid about their mission, right? Like a lot of people, as we alluded to earlier, they say they care about like women in tech, or they'll say they care about, organization or women, or even just demographics that don't have easy access to the funds to get the education they need. Then they'll build a program, but the way that it's built and targeted, it's actually only people who have grandparents with, $20K laying around, which tends not to be the brown people, right? Like it tends not to be me and my family. And so I had to look very closely at all of the companies that I was working with and be like, all right, what do I want to feel good about at the end of this pandemic? And that's why I ended up at, I'm now at Red Hat. Red Hat is an open source company. It was recently acquired by IBM. And I'm there because I care about open source. I was there at the beginning of my career too in 2008. So I'm just kind of going back home, but I wanted to make sure that I was doing something that could make a big impact in the world and with a company that aligned with my values. And so that's why I did what, I ended up moving. But I always caution people who tend to say like, oh, there's no jobs out there, or, oh, I can't get a job, or I've been on 70 interviews. I'm of the mindset, like always be interviewing. Like even when you have a good job, be interviewing, because again, your bar of experience, your bar of who you want to be in this world, it should be set pretty darn high. And you want to always be interviewing to see, what more could I do? The best thing about interviewing is you learn about these companies. You learn how they interview, you learn what they value, and you can use this to kind of hone who you are, right? And so I'm always interviewing. And then sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes I'm like, oh, well, this could be cool. Like NPR. I never thought I'd work at NPR, National Public Radio. What? It was like a dream. But because I happened to be in, I was just part of my interview. Someone asked me if I wanted to interview. I'm like, sure. I ended up becoming their, chief technologist, right? Heading up all of engineering. And it was so fun. And I would have never done that if I didn't just have that openness to have a conversation. And I loved what I was doing at the time. But I got to make and it was during an election year. So I got to make some pretty significant, I think, impact in a company. And that's something I always mention too, is nonprofits, right? Like I think we often overlook the space of nonprofit organizations thinking that they won't pay at market prices or whatever. But none of that's true, right? If you're good at what you do, like nonprofits are just like any other company. Obviously, the way they run their books is different. But when it comes to talent, they care just as much about having good talent as the rest of us. And their work-life balance is awesome.
Yeah, what you said about sort of like working for companies where you really align with their mission and their values. That reminds me of a lot of what you speak about on Lovefluencers, actually. Yes. Right? So can you sort of talk about, I guess, like that sort of balance of finding a company that you really align with, or doing work in general that you align with, that also like does good for the world, and sort of remaining authentic? Because I think it's difficult to do, because at the end of the day, it is work. It is a career. You're trying to like profit off of it in some way, but you also want to put out good into the world. So could you talk about sort of striking that balance and remaining authentic?
Absolutely. Yeah. I ended up one day waking up and just kind of being a little, again, maybe intolerant is the best word, of like going to social media, going to LinkedIn and seeing companies that just, they were all about the money. Honestly, they were all about profit, all about, I'm looking at entrepreneurs with their planes and their helicopters and their shiny watches. And I was like, what if that's like, of course I want to be a millionaire, of course, but what if that's not my goal? Like, what if my goal is to serve? What if my goal is to help? And why can't I also be a millionaire who helps people first, as opposed to, me on social, my brand being financially backed, with this idea, like if you see how much money I spend, or, my entourage of people following me around, that somehow makes a difference. And so Lovefluencers was born because I wanted to demonstrate that you could build a brand that isn't about money, right? It isn't about revenue. It isn't about profit. It's about service. And so we actually created this community. We have about 500 members now. And you can go join it, lovefluencers.com. But it's just a community of people who have these tenets, right? Like that care more about service, compassion, empathy, kindness, right? Like that we lead with that, as opposed to, how much money can I make on this deal? Or how much money can I make in this salaried position? Now, that being said, I want to encourage people to build brands that matter, that align with their values, but those brands then can garner more money, right? So as a result, I get offers every day to become an evangelist for brands, because they like the idea that I'm happy and positive and uplifting. And then I also take a moment and talk about real things, that I have things that I care about that aligns with things they care about. One of my first skills on Amazon Alexa was mindfulness. And it's one of my most popular skills. If you just say, Alexa, open mindfulness, that's mine. And when it first came out, there was a couple different, without mentioning them, I'll say granola bar type organizations that wanted me to be sponsored through my Alexa skill. And I, at the time, was like, I'm not really like gonna do brand sponsorship. But in hindsight, that's exactly what I'd want to do, right? Like back then I was like, oh, no, I'm just a lowly developer. Like, you don't want to do that. But in hindsight, I'm like, that's the future, right? The future is you build a brand so powerful that big brands pay you just to be you and do what you do for them. And so that's why, whether it's coding, whether it's user experience, whether it's testing, whether it's not even coding at all, it's education. I loved, what was it? I think Red Hat recently did they had a tool, It was like a little fun tool, and you could go through it and you'd say what you're passionate about. And at the end, it would tell you what kind of technologist you were. And I was a communication driven technologist, which couldn't have defined it any better, right? Is that I'm the one on the team that's like, let's make sure everyone understands what we just said. Let's make sure we document this. Let's make sure, that the processes are clean. Let's make sure that we're working in an agile format, right? Like, and not only that, but let me help you automate it with software. Like I run a lot of the automation and unit and functional test scripts that we build. Like those, there's a reason you are exactly who you are. If you're an introvert, extrovert, if you are, neurodiverse, like, and it's actually perfect. Like you don't have to change, but you do have to be willing to say it out loud, right? Have a perspective and put it down so that other people can go, oh, I think just like this person. Oh, you know what? I had an experience just like that. Oh my gosh, that same thing happened to me. And the more you share about your life, the easier it is for people to say that. And the more likely organizations want to then collaborate with you. And now that's the only way I've gotten jobs over the last 5 years is because people saw my brand first and they're like, I want to be part of that. So I think that's my mission, is to let people be themselves, but then also let them be willing to say it out loud in a documented format, whether that's blogging, podcasting, or video.
No, that's amazing how you could do something that you love, but also be able to empower and uplift other people, while also, like making a career,
Yes. Yeah, like they can be the same. Yes. Yeah, like I didn't have to, I love yoga, but I didn't have to go be a yoga instructor, right? I could bring everything I love about yoga and actually apply it to software engineering. And guess what? There's other yoga people who are engineers and they totally appreciate it. I remember at NPR, I kicked off, of course, I headed all of engineering. So I kicked off our engineering offsite with a meditation. And do you know how many people came up to me and they're like, that was so amazing. Like I never would have thought we would have ever started anything. And it wasn't long. Like my mindfulness skill is 1 minute of meditation. So it was like a couple minutes, but just being willing to bring that part of my life and make it part of my job. Like that's, I think, the world we're moving into, and the world is celebrating it. I think we all want more authentic experiences, in what we do, as well as, giving people the ability to be who they are.
Definitely. And I know that a lot of the young women that I talk to, we're really trying to strike that balance between being able to find work in a career and doing something that we love, but at the same time being able to sustain yourselves. And at times it does definitely seem like a privilege, right? Like compared to what our parents have gone through.
Oh, for sure.
But no, definitely that is something that I talk to a lot with my friends and a lot of the people that I know.
Yeah, it's kind of that suck it up generation, right? Like back then,
definitely. Now we're like, I want it all.
Yeah, you took a job and you were happy to have it. And now we don't, and the reality is we don't have to live like that. Like we don't actually have to follow those rules. You can define who you are, create a brand, and then companies will align with you. Or you'll find out you partner with another woman or another man and you create a new company, right? And that new company attracts people who think like you and want to be part of your brand. Like it's just a totally different game. And our parents, just so you know, will always say, oh, no, you take that IBM job and you enjoy it and you never leave. My parents told me that 22 years ago, when I got my first job at IBM, they're like, that's it, you're set for life. And I'm like, not exactly, but that's okay. Cause that was a mindset of that time. But yes, we need to be willing to create a personal brand that can survive companies, that can create companies, and that can support people. And that's what I think, that's what Lovefluencers ended up being all about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So that being said, for all the young women here today, or girls out there in general that are interested in entering the field of tech, or maybe perhaps have an interest in it, what sort of advice or things that you would like to say to them?
Yeah, I think the thing I always gravitate towards is what makes individuals successful in the field of technology is your ability and interest in tinkering, right? In hackathons. Like if you're here, you're already you've raised your hand and said, I like this world that we're in. But literally every every job in technology is someone who's looking past what we're doing today to invent something we might do tomorrow. And at Amazon, Jeff Bezos used to always tell everyone in these little videos that they'd send out, he'd be like, innovation does not happen in these big swaths, right? Like someone just doesn't just plop down a device and go, poof, here it is, right? They instead are tiny moves, small moves. I love this movie Contact with Jodie Foster. Her dad would always say, like, small moves is how you find the station that you want to listen to, or the satellite signal that you want. And the same is true, in these companies, is that you can make the smallest change or innovation or like macro in an Excel spreadsheet that ends up saving time, that then turns in, it becomes this cascading, almost domino effect. So I try to encourage people to just innovate all the time. And if you are new, the way you could do that is just jump into existing projects. GitHub is a great place to do this. Open source projects, great place to go. But let's say you're nervous and you don't want to be like jumping into something where people are going to look at the work you're doing. Instead, fork existing projects. I do it all the time. I'll find a project in GitHub and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And I will fork it. And here's how I learn. I will go and recreate it exactly as the creator created it. I will recode everything line by line. I am part of the Copilot. So now it's trying to auto complete everything for me, but I try to type in everything line by line. And then some muscle memory starts to develop, right? Where I start to see patterns in how they use data sources and how they use different APIs. And I'm like, oh, I see you're using Twilio here. Okay, that's cool. And I'm not creating now. I'm just learning by doing. It's literally equivalent to like tracing paper for artists, right? Where there's a reason there's paper artists have that you can almost see through, because they can lay it on top of something complex that they've never done before, and they can build muscle memory. And that's where you can start to see, like, is this for me? Is this something I want to do? And then it's a matter of finding, the right company and not being willing to wait for the right company, right? Like find the company that aligns with your values as much as they align, that you both align together on the same leadership principles.
Thank you so much for that, Noelle. I guess as we're kind of wrapping up, I have one final question for you. I am, again, a psychology major. I specialize in mental health. So that being said, I know that you are a very busy and very well accomplished woman. How do you maintain your mental health, and how do you take care of yourself in the midst of, doing everything that you do?
Thank you so much for asking. I am very specific. I have 4 children, right? And my dad lives here in my house with me. So I wake up every day, and I actually have in dry erase marker on my mirror, I have a checklist of stuff that I want to do. One of them is very simple, but when you're busy and have kids, it's easy to forget. But it's like, just take care of myself, wash my face, brush my teeth, like basic stuff. Take vitamins, right? Like those are in the top 3 of like just self-care, right? So I feel like self-care and mental health go hand in hand. And then I spend at least 20 minutes in some kind of activity, right? Getting my heart racing, building up a sweat. I am on the Peloton. It's my favorite thing these days, but I used to do hot yoga. It was Bikram yoga back then. And I did it. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I loved it because it's intense and it almost replicates bad situations at work, like where it's super, super hard and you have to just breathe through it and smiling at the end, right? So it gave me a lot of that. And Peloton's the same way. I work super duper hard in those classes. And then I make sure that I'm smiling at the end. Like no matter what hard thing I go through, I may think I can't do it. I push through that doubt and end up smiling. So that those things kind of set me up. Then I journal, and I try to do a few things, hopefully will be helpful to you. One, I journal 3 goals, and they're not memorized. They're basically kind of paraphrased every day. But what's my one personal goal that I want to achieve? What's my professional goal I want to achieve? And what's a financial goal that I want to achieve? And this might be 3 years out, but it's like, I'm going to have a $3 million in revenue business. Like I just write it down every single morning. And then I finish that up with basically, it's like a gratitude meditation, right? Or mindfulness meditation, but it's not like I sit and put on fancy music and like find peace. I typically will either right before I start journaling or right after I start journaling, just close my eyes, put my feet flat on the floor, which is just kind of a practice I use, and just focus on my breath. And I found that breathing practice, it allows me to practice quieting my mind. And more importantly, when I'm in an intense situation, I can channel that breathing. And it's almost habitual because I do it every morning. When I have something bad happen, my kids do it now. They'll be like, Mom, you should breathe. Because they know as soon as I shift into that state of mind and energy, like I calm down, I create space between any emotional reaction. Like it just feels better. And because of this self-awareness, I now very rarely lose my cool. Like I don't get mad, I don't yell, because there's separation between the emotion that I'm having and who I know is the calm Noelle that, sits at this desk every morning in this meditative state. So I think it's really cool. So those are the things I do. It's basically 5 things. But I take care of myself. I get on my Peloton. I spend about 5 minutes, not long. It doesn't take long, 5 minutes breathing. And then I write down my goals every single day. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Noelle, for coming. I'm so I had a lot of fun and I love hearing from you. I know even if our fields aren't directly related, I think just being a woman in STEM, hearing about your experiences really makes me feel really good. And I think a lot of our participants feel the same way. But again, thank you.
And we could be friends. So if we're not friends already, Emma and I are already friends, but if we're not, just connect with me. I know you might not think it's legit now. I'm on Instagram, Noelle.ai. I'm on TikTok, Noelle.ai. And then I'm on, obviously on LinkedIn. You're welcome to, if you don't have a profile, you can connect with me there when you get one, but definitely connect. My DMs are open. I am here to help you and support you. And most importantly, just remind you that you're awesome and that you don't have to change one little bit. Just evolve the way you want to evolve.
Yeah. Okay. So again, thank you so much. And for all the participants that showed up today, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. But without further ado, have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Happy hacking. Okay, bye.
Bye.